Welcome to this episode of our program, Daily Debate. As usual, we will be discussing an important debate. Tonight we'll be speaking about COP27 and up till COP27 challenges and opportunities. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has already said that Egypt will adopt a comprehensive and neutral approach during its presidency of the upcoming COP27, or the UN's Conference of Parties on Climate Change, that will be held in November at the Red Sea Resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. Egypt will take into account definitely the priorities and stances of all parties to ensure that the summit culminates in positive results in line with the international efforts to handle the climate change issue or the threats of the climate change. President Sisi has stressed that the COP27 summit will support efforts to reduce emissions and provide funding for developing countries to deal with the climate change challenge. Climate finance has been a debated issue at every COP meeting since developed countries failed to meet their promises to mobilize $100 billion in climate finance annually by 2020 to help developing nations to mitigate and the adaptation efforts. We'll be speaking about how Egypt is preparing for such an important summit to take place in Egypt. We'll be speaking about how Egypt is transferring into green, putting in, the projects into the green mode, how Egypt is preparing for the strategy or what is needed to be adopted during that summit. In our episode tonight, let me welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Amany Asfour, President of Africa Business Council. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
My pleasure.
The pleasure is all ours. Before we delve into our discussion, let me first have this quick top story of the day. And President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi met on Thursday with Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madboul and Engineer Mohammed Yahya Zaki, head of the General Authority for the Suez Canal Economic Zone. Presidential spokesman Ambassador Bassam Radi said the meeting reviewed current and future projects in the Suez Canal Economic Zone. The President directed to focus on the project's strategy in the Suez Canal Economic Zone on investments aimed at localizing technology and possessing industrial capacity and providing job opportunities in integration with projects related to the port system and marine services. On his part, the head of the General Authority for the Suez Canal Economic Zone presented efforts to localize green hydrogen and green ammonia projects in cooperation with foreign partnership. In this regard, President Sisi directed to enhance efforts to attract foreign investments in the field of clean energy production, especially green hydrogen and its various industrial applications, in order to maximize the benefit from strategic and vital location of the canal, which contributes to become one of the leading and attractive arenas in this emerging industry, as well as transforming it to be a global logistics center for refueling ships with green fuel. We move on now to our next part. Before we delve into our discussion, let's first have a quick report. And Egypt urges more global financing for adaptation of green projects at first ever Climate Week in Dubai. Let's watch.
Minister of International Cooperation Rani al-Mashat said that upping finances has become a necessity to develop climate change adaptation projects. While participating in a high-level session as part of activities of the 2022 Middle East and North Africa Climate Week, the first ever in Dubai, al-Mashat said that the projects aim to ease and mitigate the negative impact and repercussions of climate change. She also stressed the necessity of increasing hybrid financing solutions to raise financing by the private sector towards the green transition. The event was organized by the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, in the Emirati city in March 2022. Al-Mashat discussed chances of boosting green growth and overcoming challenges posed by climate change, in addition to the implementation of international agreements on maintaining and preserving the climate. Al-Mashad said that the African continent is in direct need of enormous financing to fund projects aimed at combating climate change and encouraging the private sector to take part in these ventures. She added that multilateral banks and international financing institutions play an important role which can support the participation of the private sector in promoting green transition efforts through technical support and innovative financing solutions. Middle East and North Africa Climate Week 2022 commenced positively, with stakeholders reiterating their commitment to collective action to combat climate change regionally and globally. Middle East and North Africa Climate Week provides a platform for promoting dialogue and accelerating efforts to achieve climate action ambitions in the region. Participants emphasize the importance of concerted efforts to increase the momentum of climate action and respond to environmental challenges. Egypt is preparing to host the 2022 United Nations Conference of Parties on Climate Change Conference COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in November. Cairo has vowed to speak up for Africa's aspirations to cope with climate change at the COP27. Egypt has said it places priority on projects to mitigate the effects of climate change, including a focus on meeting the obligations of the Paris Agreement and exploring how the private sector and NGOs can play a role in financing green investments during the conference. Cairo also stressed it will build at the COP27 on the outcomes of Glasgow's COP26 to move from the stage of climate pledges to actual action on the ground, whether in reducing emissions or financing climate-oriented projects in developing African countries.
Right, welcome back. And indeed, we are in this new battle, the battle of development and the battle of taking Egypt to safe haven with a vision, an integrated vision for the whole Egypt. And one of those is how to confront a challenge, a new challenge that is facing not just Egypt, but the whole world, and particularly Africa, the Middle East, and definitely Egypt, one of both sides. That is climate change. That is our topic tonight. And let me again welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Amany Asfour, President of Africa Business Council. Again, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
The pleasure is all ours. If we start with preparations. Now, we've been speaking about lots and lots of preparations Egypt have been doing in order to prepare for this much anticipated summit to be held in November, the climate change or COP27. How you witness how Egypt is preparing for such a huge summit?
Well, it's really very important because it's a UN conference. All the world is really looking now at Egypt. I mean, I have been on a big tour towards last month in different parts of Africa, Rwanda, Malawi, Kenya, Zambia, and even to the west in Europe. Everybody is looking how Egypt will really be able to host this very important conference for the world. How will be the participation of the governments, but also of the civil society organizations and the private sector, because it's all the partners of development should be there. I believe that Egypt is doing a great job towards really the positive image of how Egypt will handle the COP27, but also how to engage all the parties, because on behalf of Africa, Egypt is hosting the COP27. So how are they going to deal with the civil society organization, with the governments, with the private sector, all the actions that's going to be on the margin of the government? Because normally there is the government negotiations, there is the intergovernmental, but also on the side there are many events that will be held by the private sector, all the civil society organization. So I believe that Egypt is really doing a great job. with reference to either the organizational part, either the positive image of the awareness about the COP27 across the whole world. I have met several ministers that they already are coming to Sharm el-Sheikh, and on the other side of because it's going to be at the Red Resort, it gives a big image for reference to the touristic attraction, but also because climate change, so it's on the Red Sea, so it really shows what can Egypt offer as eco-friendly, what can Egypt offers to show how clean energy is used. So there is a lot of factors that is inside the preparation, whether it's the positive image or the contents of the whole meeting or the side events that will be taken on consideration, but also the preparation on behalf of Africa.
If we speak about all those factors altogether, let me just divide those factors in parts. We are speaking about Egypt coordinating with all partners, world partners. We're speaking about a foreign minister who has been touring the whole world, sometimes in Asia, sometimes with African partners, a number of meetings. The foreign minister who is heading the delegation of the COP27 to coordinate. How important are those diplomatic coordination to prepare for such a summit? How is that important to take into account what the African continent, the Middle East, want to put before the world's countries? Well,
it is very important because actually Africa has been suffering the whole negative effects of carbon emissions, while it is already the burden of all and carrying all the burden, while it is the developed countries actually who are responsible for the carbon emission and all the industrialization. So it is very important to see how Africa has be in one position. How can Africa really show its solidarity with reference to the negotiations? How can the developed world commit? Because this time it's about action. The COP26, there was a lot of pledges, $100 billion that were pledged, but has not been in action.
Indeed.
So financing this is very important. So I believe within the negotiation, it's very important to show how really Africa will stand as one position to see how the developed countries will be able to submit to their pledges. And also how there will be an investment, because the private sector have a role also to do. What will be the investment in green economy, in blue economy, in all to mitigate the risks of climate change across Africa. We have a lot in Africa that is already suffering from the climate change.
Indeed.
And at all levels, was in agriculture, in health, in energy, everybody is suffering. How would the mitigation of risks of the climate change, and how will this affect the people of Africa, like the women, the rural areas, the women agriculture, the droughts that's happening across the continent, whether in the Horn of Africa or other parts of Africa. So all those challenges, all those, Africa is carrying all this burden. How would this be financed? How would the developed countries be able? How we will have awareness about the mitigation of risks of climate change across the African continent? So there is a huge, agenda on the table of the ministers, or on the table of all the parties, to see how we can make sure of the investment in green economy, and how to mitigate the risks and how to finance.
Indeed. Well, Egypt, from this perspective, has put a vision concerning the implementation of the summit pledges and advancing national and African concerns pertinent to climate change issues. How do you view this vision that Egypt has put, and how do you view the main objectives that Egypt has put forward in order to be able to achieve much aspired results of such a summit?
If we go to Egypt, actually, National Agenda 2030 vision of Egypt, it is really derived from the whole Sustainable Development Goals. And climate change, Sustainable Development Goals is about climate change. Climate action is goal number 13, but Sustainable Development Goal 14 is life below water, 15 is life on land, about SDG number 8 with water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, sustainable cities. So all the SDGs really is around how the climate change, of course, food security and agriculture. Yes. So all this about really climate change. How would this be envisaged within the negotiation, within the agenda of the COP27? Because it is already embedded within the agenda and the vision of Egypt 2030. So I believe that through whole sessions of the COP27, this will be tackled in different areas. How, as I mentioned, the negotiations of all of Egypt on behalf of all Africa, how Africa will actually put its concrete agenda and its concrete action towards having this finance being submitted, and not only about pledges. How would the investors, how to attract investments in Africa with reference to clean energy, with reference to green economy, with reference to even blue economy, because Africa around is the whole seas and oceans around Africa. How would this be really also invested in with blue economy? So the role of the private sector is huge also within the investment and within the projects. The role of the developed countries should be maximized, because, as I mentioned, it is the burden of it is the burden on Africa, but it is the carbon emission from the Western and from the developed countries.
Indeed. Indeed, and hence Egypt launched its National Climate Change Strategy 2050. This strategy is filled with many sectors. Part of it is cutting the emission in various sectors, maintaining the sustainable economic growth, promoting the use of renewable energy sources, producing energy from waste, and using alternative energy forms like green hydrogen. And we have just seen the president holding a meeting to follow up on this issue. From your point of view, how do you view how Egypt is trying to transform into green, particularly the past few, let me say, years, in order to be able to be a role model for Africa and the Middle East, and also
actually, we have already seen concrete actions and steps towards this, because if we saw the major new administrative capital, how it is a smart capital, how it is based really on clean energy, how it is really the whole planning of it to be a role model across the continent, or even the world, of how renewable energy could be done. Also, we can see the investment in renewable energy in different parts. Within, whether it is solar energy, whether it's wind energy, it's really whether from the waste, as you mentioned. So the whole strategy of reducing the carbon emission, the whole strategy of investment in renewable energy is very well pronounced, and it is embedded within the strategy. But the whole issue really is about the coordinated efforts which is happening across all the ministries to achieve this agenda of reducing the carbon emission and the mitigation of the risks of the climate change, and using science and technology, because this is very important. Science and technology should be geared towards renewable energy. It should, all our universities and scientific research centers should be really utilize the resources in order for instance, the crops, how we can have more species that would be resistant to high temperature? How can we do scientific research to the gain of our food security? There is a lot of research technology that should be invested in for the achieving of this agenda.
Part of COP27 and what it should be delivering, the Egypt has said that it would cover primarily climate fundings, dimensions of coexistence, priorities of developing countries, updated national contributions of states, the goals and the experiences. To which extent do you think developed nations and countries are aware of problems that are really hitting hard the African continent and the Middle East because of this climate change phenomenon?
Well, they are aware, but the issue of what will be the action of them being aware, because they are aware of what's hitting Africa in agriculture, in the droughts that's happening, in the that affects the women at the grassroots, that affects the cattle, and the cattle and for instance all the that are owned by the women, by the rural areas, this is their source of life. And they are losing them. The crops that are really dying because of high temperature. There is a lot, and health, because climate change affects even with reference to the health of many of the women in rural areas. So there is a lot that is affecting our continent. So in being aware of what's happening in the continent, and even this could be really more envisaged, because gender also and climate change is a big aspect, and there will be an organized side event within the COP27 regarding gender and climate justice. Because climate justice is very important, as I mentioned, the carbon emission happening from industrialized countries, but the women in Africa are the ones who are suffering this in different fields. So the issue of how the industrialized countries, the developed countries, will fulfill their promises of the pledges of the 100 billion, and how will the private sector actually make sure that they invest in renewable energy, in green economy, and discard all the carbon emissions.
Dr. Amany, we're speaking about Egypt, and Egypt has always rallied for African causes at large. Part of that is what it sees from the threat of climate change on the African continent. Let me know from you how Egypt has been rallying for the African causes at large since it assumed responsibility, and even before, but ever since it assumed again the responsibility of taking the helm of being the president of the African Union, before and after, and how Egypt has been rallying for many causes up till this COP27.
Well, if we take the presidency of Egypt, of His Excellency Abdel Fattah Sisi as the chair for African Union, under his presidency, it was the launch of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Under his presidency, he really stressed on the investment in infrastructure and energy in the African continent for industrialization. He has been also pushing for the renewable energy and the green economy. So all the key messages coming from Egypt to the continent during its during the chairmanship of Egypt to African Union was really geared towards how would the African continent rise, and how would Egypt support with reference to technical assistance, with reference to scientific research, exporting its scientific research, with reference to building capacity of the private sector, but also of SMEs, of women, even on the government's levels.
When we come back, we'll speak about the private sector and how Egypt is very much into their support. But before we go on with our discussion, let's take this second report in Egypt's rallies African climate consensus ahead of COP27. Let's watch.
Egypt has intensified climate policy discussions with African countries ahead of COP27. Egypt has recently intensified its discussions with African countries to determine the continent's needs ahead of the United Nations Climate Change Conference 2022 COP27, which it will host in Sharm el-Sheikh in November. On March 29th, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi hosted Yves Massoudi, Congo's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development, who conveyed a message from Congolese President Félix Tshisekedi, expressing deep appreciation for the tireless Egyptian efforts led by el-Sisi to advance the African Union agenda regarding climate change with the aim of supporting the joint African position. Presidential spokesman Ambassador Bassam Radi said President el-Sisi reiterated Egypt's keenness to coordinate and mobilize the necessary support for the African countries to ensure the urgent adaptation to the negative economic and social effects of climate change in the short, medium, and long terms. He also stressed the need to work with all parties on behalf of the African continent to ensure that COP27 produces balanced results that contribute to supporting international efforts to confront climate change and enhance the ability of developing countries to adapt and access financing. On March 26th, President el-Sisi had also received his Rwandan counterpart, Paul Kagame. Speaking at a joint press conference following their meeting, the Egyptian president stressed his country's keenness to convey the aspirations of the African continent during the COP27, expressing his hope that the summit would produce tangible results that would achieve a qualitative leap for the African continent in the issue of climate change. Within the framework of the Egyptian initiatives to be launched at the COP27, Petroleum and Mineral Resources Minister Tarek El-Molla announced during his participation at the International Energy Agency's ministerial meeting held in Paris on March 23rd and 24th that an Egyptian initiative is being drawn up to develop the energy transition in Africa, the supply of energy from renewable sources, in cooperation with the AU and African energy ministers, to be launched during the upcoming summit. Richard Monang, coordinator for climate change issues in Africa at the UN Environment Programme, said that the COP27 can be considered as an African climate summit, which is expected to build on what has been achieved during the COP26 in Glasgow. Africa is home to 17% of the world's population, while it is responsible for less than 4% of global emissions, and emissions in the region are likely to peak at a later time. So a just transition from this climate crisis for Africa will require clean energy generation, and the COP27 needs to prioritize this.
Right, welcome back. And yes, this, as the President said, we will do, but also you have to do. And when he spoke about you, he was speaking about private sector as a main supporter. So tell me, how do you view the contribution of the private sector and the business sector in trying to support Egypt in such a huge challenge?
Well, under the Africa Business Council, you know, the Africa Business Council is established in line with the decision summits of the heads of states of the African Union to boost our intra-Africa trade and operationalize the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And our founding vision is a competitive, borderless, innovative Africa for trade, investment, and industrialization. Under Africa Business Council, we have technical committees. These technical committees are comprised from the private sector. So we have technical committees for infrastructure, for energy, for climate change, for tourism, for agriculture, agribusiness, for trade, for industry, for SMEs, for women, for youth, for creative industries. So it's a huge portfolio. So within the Technical Committee of Energy, our roadmap across the continent is how to really investment in renewable energy. Same with the Climate Change, actually, Technical Committee, and for the agriculture and agribusiness, for tourism, for eco-tourism. So the whole agenda of the private sector under the Africa Business Council is to see how we support the countries in investment within this sector of renewable energy. I believe there is a lot actually because Egypt has huge opportunities for investment in renewable energy, but also has huge potentials of exporting its scientific expertise of its private sector across the whole continent. Because it's a win-win situation. We need Africa to benefit from the scientific expertise of Egyptian scientific research institutes, and to see how we bring investors from across the continent to invest in green economy and blue economy. So alongside the COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh, inshallah, Africa Business Council, in collaboration with African Union, we will be organizing a side event that will be the role of private sector in investing in green economy and blue economy and renewable energy, and bringing together investors from the continent and from outside the continent to see what are the projects that could be really invested in, what are the business opportunities, how can we really accelerate the investment within the renewable energy across the whole continent. We will also have another event for gender and climate justice, as I mentioned, because the investment also, the climate change is affecting women across the whole continent, and it is very, very relevant. Agriculture, agribusiness. I mean, now we can see that if we are suffering from some food security, how would really the 60% arable land of Africa could be invested in for actually agricultural products that will ensure our food security across the whole continent, and to be also how we invest in renewable energy using all the alternative resources for energy across the continent.
Actually, you pinpointed your finger on a very important issue, which is the gender and the importance of empowering women and gender at large. We're speaking about women, we're speaking about youth. Part of the directions of the president was to focus on the role of entrepreneurship and startups and the need to support these small and medium enterprises to adopt sustainable practices and enhance the capacities to confront this part, also the challenge of climate change. How would that lead to a kind of support or boosting the vision of the country?
That is very important, because at the Africa Business Council also we have the youth committee and we have the investment committee. So what we have a program, we started a program for empowering the youth of Africa called Hunting for Africa's Unicorns, which is really about how we help the startups, the youth startups across the continent. And one of the criteria for the startups of the continent is how to have their startups, whether it is technologically, climate, it's about climate, how to mitigate the risks of the climate change, how to empower them in having really projects that is investing in green economy and eco-friendly environment. So we already under the Africa Business Council have tackled this issue, and I believe Egypt has a big role also to play, because empowering the youth and startups across the continent is huge. Now what we are doing is that we had last year a big conference here in Egypt, the Private Sector Forum, or the African Union Private Sector Forum, organized by Africa Business Council, and we will also have it next June in Zambia, in Livingstone. We have a big session for pitching for the youth startups, and the main criteria for those youth startups is really to be how they are technologically with tech and also with environmentally and with climate change. To adjust for the climate change and to invest in renewable energy. So these are two crucial issues that we are working on to empower our youth and bringing them venture capitals from across the continent. So there are already venture capitals that want to invest in new startups that is boost towards the technological and the environmental and eco-friendly and using all the renewable energy and the resources. So we have young startups who are already investing of changing for the waste into and recycled into energy in some parts. We have women that also started this. So there is a huge potential now, but Africa Business Council are trying now to do a mapping exercise for what is existing on the continent and what is the role of private sector to invest in those projects and the startups.
Actually, Dr. Amany, in doing that, you are giving a future for our youth. Plus, of course, directing them towards what, or to integrate with the vision of the whole country. When we speak about the importance of the small and medium enterprises and supporting entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs and startups and all this, we're also speaking about a should-be role of the big business capitals and the big business people, and how would they support also the vision of Egypt towards that and that?
Under Africa Business Council also we have a group that we call it Africa Business Pioneers. Africa Business Pioneers is really about the big business people across the continent, and they are already the ones who are leading the technical committees within our Africa Business Council. So we have, for instance, the president for East Africa Chamber of Commerce. He's the one who is leading the infrastructure, and we have the chair for the West Africa Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's the one who is leading the agriculture and agribusiness. We have the chair for Comesa Business Council leading the transport and connectivity. So we have already the private sector of Africa involved within the agenda of Africa. Also energy, it is chaired by one of the eminent companies here in Egypt in energy. So really, how are we going to coordinate our efforts and towards the investment in renewable energy and investment also in infrastructure and industrialization using renewable energy, because this is really very important, because now under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area we need to boost our intra-Africa trade. We need to have a made in Africa product which is competitive standard, which is value added. So how are we going to do this without industrialization? And to boost industrialization, we need to focus on how we have renewable energy and alternative energy to boost our industrialization in Africa.
Indeed. I have only 1 minute left for me here. And what is your aspiration for the upcoming COP27?
Oh my God, that's a very important question, inshallah, because myself, I've involved to organize about 2 or 3 side events within the COP27 to see how we really highlight the image of Egypt as a positive image of Egypt and gear its agenda towards renewable energy, but also the great ambitions of Egypt, inshallah, to lead such a conference and to have it on behalf of Africa as a successful in all, not only on organization, but the outcome of the negotiations of how the industrial companies, countries would really put into action the pledges they are for financing development, financing all this, the climate change.
Put into action is the right word. Dr. Amany Asfour, President of the Africa Business Council, we thank you so much for being with us tonight and for your input as usual.
Thank you, it's my real pleasure.
Thank you so much. And I guess Sharm el-Sheikh has been fully transformed into green. So we are much anticipating this important summit. Many thanks for watching and good night.